Namaskar. Thank you for joining us on our weekly program on geoeconomics. Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the end of 2023 gave an interview to the India Today group. In that interview, he spoke about the economic aspirations of India, the trust that the people have in his ability to deliver on those aspirations. He said that his governance track record speaks for itself from 2001 to the present day. In 2001, when the Chief Minister Modi became Gujarat Chief Minister for the first time, the Gujarat economy was around $26 billion and it currently is around $260 billion, with the BJP still in power. In 2014, the year Prime Minister Modi took office, in his first term as Prime Minister, the size of India's economy was around $2 trillion. It is now more than $3.75 trillion. The Prime Minister said, and I quote, "What you see today is not what I worked on. A far bigger picture will unfold finally. I work on a big canvas." So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Joining us are two economists who track the Indian economy very closely. Professor Anil Kumar from the Delhi School of Economics and Dr. Amit Kapoor, a visiting scholar at Stanford University and president of the Indian Council on Competitiveness. We have with us Professor Anil Kumar at the moment. Professor Kumar, you know, we are at the start of 2024. Has the Indian economy ever started a calendar year in better shape than this? You know, the world's fastest growing large economy. Forex reserves are above 600 billion US dollars. Tax revenues are good. Inflation is under control. There's strong domestic demand. What do you think?
India's progression from a developing unstable economy, if I talk about the early 2010, now it is the fastest growing major economy of the world, the fifth largest economy of the world. And if you believe IMF and World Bank, the bright star in the global arena. This has been pointed out by World Bank and IMF. The Amrit Kal in which the country has heralded now in 2022, it sets the target of becoming the developed nation by the year 2047, that is by the completion of 100 years of independence of the country. But this is not without facts, that we have expanded at the fastest pace in the last 10 years with the focus on infrastructure development, focus on manufacturing, and above all, a knowledge-based digital economy with inclusive development. And this is not surprising because in 2014, the Modi government came to the power on the plank of development. I think that is for the first time in the history of this country that a government or a party has come to the power on the plank of development. And in the first independence speech, Mr. Modi, the first scheme which was rolled out, I remember, was that of, financial inclusion scheme, Jan Dhan Yojana, and then Make in India, because we realized early that if we want to grow and have to grow at a faster rate, the manufacturing sector has to be focused. And for that, Make in India and connected with this, the ease of doing business were the two things which were implemented for the first time. And after that, a number of structural reforms were undertaken during the Corona Kal when the whole world was looking Corona as a challenge.
Yes.
India realized as a big opportunity when the realignment of global forces took place and all the major sectors of the economy was revamped, and we can see the result today.
Yes, Dr. Kapoor, India's G20 presidency was well appreciated by one and all. So how much of an impact has this had, let's say, on India's growing international stature as a growth engine?
So I think there are two parts of this story. So if you really look at India's growth engine, there is a definitive positive as we are really looking at it. Like one, it is the largest demography in the world, the largest democracy in the world, and so on and so forth. And with the market power which is arising. So right now we are ranked at about fifth largest economy in the world and expected to grow to something close to the third largest economy in the next decade or so. So if you're saying that, so there is this larger ambit of economic impact that India has been talking about. So if you really look at the world percentages, like India was a fairly small share in the 1990s. We were just very small in terms of 1% of the world GDP. Right now, we are a little over 3%. But that only it tells us about the clout that India actually has. But having said that, there is a different thing that is actually happening, and that is about soft power that India actually has. And when you talk about the soft power, it is emerging from the aspect of how India has been looking at global issues. Because if you really talk about global issues per se, India has actually been taking very measured stances, and which have actually been appreciated by the opposition also, because there is always this whole political thing that happens. But what we do see is that there is appreciation across the board. India's stance on various issues, especially if you really look at the Ukraine crisis, the Hamas-Israel crisis that is actually happening. And that is also increasing the stature of the government. It is not only about G20. I think there is an overall
Okay.
foreign policy ambit, which has actually increased across the board. And there is a great job that is actually happening.
Professor Kumar, India's G20 presidency, it focused on inclusive growth, digital innovation, climate resilience, equitable global health, all these sort of things. As a direction, has this given greater voice, let's say, to the global south?
Yes, certainly. And for the first time, this issue was raised that the developed nation should pay for the carbon emission less technology, which is to be adopted by the developing economy. And I think that the developed nation has to transfer the technology at a very subsidized rate. Then only we'll be able to achieve whatever has been agreed as per the Paris Agreement, that is zero emission by 2070. It is not an easy target, especially for the developing nation. And this particular call was made in the G20 nation. When we talk about our country, we are already on this path, and we have successfully done the solar energy, and many of the installations have been done in the country. And at the same time, we are able to produce the solar energy, which is beyond our target, which has been set up by the year 2023. And then the hydrogen mission of the government. And I think that in the time to come, we'll be able to generate the low carbon emission hydrogen energy and will be able to export it also. Then the emphasis of the Indian government on electronic vehicles. India has become one of the major players of EVs in the world. So
Yes.
that India is adopting all the measures, but at the same time, India is voicing the concern of the global south also, that the other countries who are poor or who are developing nations who cannot afford to have the carbon emission less technology. I think the developed nations should pay attention to that.
Dr. Kapoor, Prime Minister said that the government is focused on the right mix of policies, incentives and skilling for the semiconductor industry. Now, why is this industry so important in India's march towards a $5 trillion economy?
Well, I think this is one of the most important sectors that you have to really look at. If you really look at the whole computer space or the tech space, especially the semiconductor industry, it's a $5 trillion economy that actually exists across the world. And within that $5 trillion economy, China is contributing close to about $1 trillion. India is at a nascent stage right now, but that actually tells us that there is a huge imperative in terms of possibilities of creating that influence in that space. And why should we create that influence? And what the Prime Minister has been saying, like we are unleashing something very important here, and that unleashing is of the talent that India actually has. If you really look at it, India has tremendous R&D talent. In fact, all the chipsets, if you really talk about Intel or if you talk about Cisco, they are defining and they're actually working on programming the microprocessors in India itself. So it is just now an actual movement or projection towards doing something much better. And when you talk about something like semiconductors, the kind of opportunities that it will have for creating a local ecosystem is tremendous. What we are already seeing is various players, like say Apple coming into this system, Foxconn is there, TSMC is talking, and so on and so forth. There are huge positives that are happening. And I see, if you really look at it, India touches something like close to $1 trillion in terms of exports on semiconductors in the next 10 years, maybe even the next 15 years. It will have such huge impact on the quality of life of people, on GDP of the country, on GDP per capita. So it actually means a lot. And the world in the future is not about anything else. The world in the future is about technology. And that is what India is aspiring for. So if you really look at it, like the Prime Minister recently made a statement that he's painting a canvas.
Yes.
Like for the first time, if you really look at a leader in the last 2 decades or 3 decades, there is a person who is actually trying to sell a dream to us. And that dream is so important because if we don't dream right, we are not in a position to actually take that march forward. So today I see that India is dreaming right and we are moving towards that direction. You can always debate about slow or fast or whatever, but the dream is there, it is intact, and we are moving towards it.
Indeed, Dr. Kapoor, take this question as well. Prime Minister says that his knowledge is gained through the ground connect, and he's lived the reality, which he applies to his policies. How much of this has led to that Modi guarantee that the Prime Minister talked about in this interview and people's trust?
Oh, this is a very important question. In fact, if you talk to me from as a management professional or even an economist, I would rather say that there is a leader who actually has pulse on the ground. He understands what is required. See, a typical thing, if you really look at what you call as Modi guarantee is about even assessing and understanding what people need. The mantra of improving the quality of life or ease of living of people. What does that mean? It effectively means that how do I take basic services to people? DPI is an exceptional example of using technology and really pushing it to the people. In fact, today, if you really look at it, what digital payment infrastructure has done is that anybody who's in requirement or who has the need is in a position to get direct transfers onto his bank account. This also has a huge multiplier on GDP itself. The other thing, if you really look at it, is in terms of how the government has actually looked at or how the Prime Minister has initiated programs like, say, aspirational districts. We never talked about the backward districts in our country. And here is a person who comes and says, let's talk about aspiring India. Let's talk about, even if they are possibly the most backward districts in the country, let us make them the best in the country. And what we have seen today is that out of the 112 districts, and this is a study that we have done, 50% have actually gone better, way beyond some of the districts in the country. So there has to be a new list of aspirational districts now. So there is such huge, vast level of improvement. That's the same thing that has actually happened with programs like, say, aspirational blocks programs. So understanding the needs of people and taking it onto the ground is exceedingly important.
Professor Anil Kumar, there are images, or let's say monuments, in fact, in a sense. There's the Statue of Unity, there's the Bharat Mandapam, there's the Central Vista, there's the new Parliament building. These also define a work ethic of transformation. But the economy also is transforming at the same time. We see, it's digital ready, it is pro-people, pro-planet, it's inclusive. How do these symbols of change actually match the economic change that's also taking place?
For me, these are the symbols of new India. That how the India is emerging from being a developing nation to a developed nation. See the kind of arrangements, the organizations which have been done during G20, I think it was magnificent. The Bharat Mandapam, it can host any number of international exhibitions. That was the need of the hour. So that way the government has touched upon almost all the sectors of the economy, whether it is tourism sector, whether it is organizing of the conferences and international programs, seminars, workshops in this country. It has touched upon, in fact, all the aspects. Then the second thing is that the development, which has to be seen, it can be seen from the mindset of the people. Just imagine that more than 100 million people have been connected to the path of development. Either it is by providing of the toilets, whether providing of the pakka houses in urban areas, in villages, whether it is delivery of free cylinders to the people, whether it is, free food grains for 80 crore people. It is unimaginable, the largest scheme ever done in any part of the world. The 50 crore people being covered by Ayushman Bharat, the health scheme, health insurance scheme. This is something unheard of. So whatever development is taking place, it is not only taking place in terms of the GDP, which we are producing, of course, at a very higher rate, but it is being impacted the lives of the common people. take any sector, or any section of the population. In fact, every section, whether it is the artisans, whether it is the small vendors, everyone is covered, whether it is the women or small marginal farmers, all these sections of the population is covered. This is called inclusive development. And when you say this development, so this development is depicted by all these factors, and which can not only be felt but can also be seen on the at the ground level.
Indeed. Dr. Kapoor, you did talk about the big canvas a little earlier, and that's really our program is focusing on that. The Prime Minister said that he looks at a big canvas, and that, if we look at it, is Viksit Bharat, or a developed India by 2047. So the plan that he revealed focuses on Gyan, that's Garib, or the poor, Yuva, or the youth, Annadata, or farmers, and Nari Shakti, or women power. Now, there is, of course, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas approach here as well, totally inclusive. Now, how would you look at this from the point of view of, let's say, a vision for the next 25 years?
Oh, so, like what the Prime Minister said, like when you use that acronym, and of course, there is something like, say, multiple sets of things that are actually being touted at or talked about. When you talk about youth, so youth in itself, if you really look at it, India's power in the next 30 years or 25 years is about its demographic dividend. We have close to about 3.5 crore people who come into the workforce, or who are actually graduating, or who are actually born, and so on and so forth. There is a rapid pace that is actually happening. So the youth is going to be the driver of development in this country, either through education, through consumption of goods, through solutions that they're actually going to put forth or they'll require, and so on and so forth. So youth becomes one of the biggest pillars that you're actually talking about. The second thing, and I think that's the most important aspect that you're really talking about, and that is about women. And when you talk about women in terms of like the female labor force participation, and the government of India has been talking about improving the female labor force participation. And without a doubt, if we do not increase it, India will not be a developed country. So he's touching a very important point, because right now the labor force participation for women is close to about 25%. And if it increases to 50%, look at the kind of talent that actually gets into the labor pool. Look at the kind of opportunities that actually get created over a period of time. And when you say the word Gyan itself, there is a very important thing. It is about knowledge. In fact, the whole idea of India as a knowledge economy. Today, India is at the cusp of a very important movement. And today, India has actually been driving a lot of knowledge creation. Look at what has happened with Chandrayaan. There is a huge absolute impact that India is creating in that sphere of space technologies and so on and so forth. And we would actually become a knowledge-driven economy. India has the talent. The question is going to be, how do we really focus on those sectors and move ahead with it? The next thing is about Garib. And what you said was, maybe Annadata. So if the question here is that how do we focus on the farmers itself, because that is where productivity opportunities are. In fact, how I see this is that there is a very important forest principle at work. If you really talk about developing economies, and what the Prime Minister is saying is the growth has to be sustainable, which is like economic activities that are carbon neutral, take care of environment, social, which means that economic growth is about social progress or ease of living. Third is about solid, which is resilience, in terms of saying that you have to create a very resilient economy. And he does talk about what do you call Atmanirbhar Bharat, and creating opportunities within India. And last but not the least is about shared, wherein economic opportunities that are shared across economic Indian society. And we are already seeing some of those points. Of course, the journey is long. It is not that a transformation of a country will happen overnight. Transformation of a country is always a pursuit which is going to take a generation or so. And we are somewhere, I think we are somewhere in the halfway point in terms of how I really look at this transformation right now. But what we are seeing as India today would actually be hugely different in the next 10 years.
Indeed. Professor Anil Kumar, Prime Minister describes himself as a karyakarta, or a party worker, who has, always throughout his life, he's put India first. That's the way he describes himself. And this approach has obviously been rewarded by the people. We can see that since the Prime Minister has been an elected head of government, both at the state and the center, now for 23 years. So does this kind of political trust actually motivate, economic performance, both, let's say, at the entrepreneurial level as well as at the worker level?
See, the economic progress or development, the prerequisite for that is the stable government, stable political system, and because that would unleash the stable policies also. If the policies keep on changing, if the government keeps on changing, or if the government is not effective at the center, I think that development will not take place. We have seen this before also when there has been change in the government every year or every 2 years, there has been policy paralysis. Now, the beauty of last 15 years has been that there is a political stability, the policies are unchanged, the stable policy regime has been unleashed, and see the progression how it has taken place. We started with the focus on manufacturing. We first started with Make in India. After that, to give a boost to the manufacturing sector, the PLI scheme was introduced. The direct taxes on the manufacturing sector was reduced to 25%. Then we have the focus on infrastructure sector where the entire emphasis has been to reduce the logistic cost, and the emphasis of the government has been that how to become competitive, how to become a part of the global supply chain. This cannot happen unless and until the government is stable, the government is strong, and there is stability in the policies also.
Uh, Dr. Kapoor, so we've been looking at the big canvas, and we've talked about the painter. Now, what do you think about the canvas? If we say that the canvas is India, by 2027, let's say we're supposed to be the third largest economy, overtaking Germany and Japan. And then what next? Because I mean, we're going to be the third largest for a long period of time until we, catch up with China and the US.
Well, so I don't think it is important for India that we have to be the second largest or the first largest or whatever. If you're in the top three, you're amongst the biggest in the world, anyways. But what is going to matter for the future, for the next 25 years, is going to be that how do we improve the quality of life of people? How do we improve the ease of living? And that is what the Prime Minister has actually said. When you say human-centric development, what does it effectively mean? The human-centric development is about like, let's take people together. If you really look at the last 10 years, especially, what is it that we have really focused on? It is about efforts to enhance skills, infrastructure, which is effectively painting a picture that we are really saying what we want to see in 2047. It is about, say, financial sector reforms that we are seeing. It is about implementation capacity that India has actually seen increasing. What we see is, like, how I really look at it is that the infrastructure that we are building today, the kind of capital investment that is happening, that would actually pave the way for the future. If you really look at United States, like what they built in 1960s is the infrastructure that they're reaping today. And that is exactly what is going to happen in India. If we build that right infrastructure, we are going to have multipliers which are going to be huge. A very simple example. So, like you talked about something like, say, Kevadia, the Statue of Unity
Yes.
project. Look at the kind of multiplier it has actually had. A lot of people don't look at it, but close to about 50,000 people earn something out of that place. 100,000 people are getting there. Look at the direct, indirect, and induced impacts that it is creating. So like the canvas is about the small dots he's actually looking at putting across. It's not just a one spread of a brush or whatever. I think there is
Yes.
a huge what I call multiplier and small steps that are being taken. If you really look at it, there is a lot of effort in terms of even defining those steps. And that is what we are seeing here today. In fact, that canvas looks very beautiful for the future, I say. If I really look at the future, I would rather think that India is going to be close to about anything between 25 to $40 trillion economy if we continue to grow the way we are, at least $20 trillion economy. And that would mean that we are going to be in a middle income country thing. So that per
Okay.
capita income, which is fairly low right now, will touch close to about $15,000. And when India has that $15,000 as per capita income, imagine the kind of impact it would actually have. Imagine the kind of influence that we can have as a society or as a country across the board. Because
Yes.
economic power also brings political power or political influence across the
Across
world.
the world. A final word from you, Professor Anil Kumar. What do you think? I mean, what's next? What is this canvas going to look like?
The next is that during the last 2 decades, we have been growing at average rate of 10.22%. At this rate, India's GDP will reach 5 trillion by 2026. and $5.5 trillion in 2027, making India the world's third largest economy by the end of 2026, from being the fifth largest economy at present. And at this rate, I think that by the year 2072, that will be the end of 125th year of our independence. Our growth rate will touch, and the size of the economy will become equal to the size of the US economy. That's a big achievement for us, and
Okay.
that's a result of what you say, Modinomics.
Okay, we leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, Professor Anil Kumar and Dr. Amit Kapoor. Thank you very much for putting this into context for us. In conclusion, let's just say this, that the Indian median age of its population, the median age of India's population, will continue to be much less than both the United States and China, and also, of course, much less than Japan and Germany. This is for the foreseeable future. And it is this human capital that will be driving India's growth. India is poised to take advantage of this in what Prime Minister Modi calls the Amrit Kal, or the period that we are going to see rapid growth potential. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.